The rain was coming down hard when Zara heard it. Not thunder, not wind, a sound she had never heard before. A deep, tearing crash from somewhere past the trees at the edge of her property. She grabbed her torch and ran toward it before she even knew why. The beam of light found the car first. A black SUV on its side. One was still spinning slowly, steam rising from the hood like something exhaling its last breath. She moved faster, and then she saw him, a man, face down in the mud, one arm stretched out ahead of him like he'd been reaching for something when the world went dark. She knelt beside him, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, and felt a pulse. Faint, but there. She exhaled. Then she got to work. Welcome to Echotales by Ken, where every story reminds you that the most powerful moments in life rarely announce themselves. Stay with me. This one is going to stay with you. His name was Kevin Bryan, though Zara did not know that yet. Nobody in that county knew that name either. Not the way the rest of the world did. To the business world, Kevin Bryan was the 40-year-old founder and CEO of Hale Bryan Technologies, a company worth $11 billion. Built from nothing over 15 years of decisions most people would not have had the nerve to make. He had been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. He had testified before Congress. He had shaken hands with heads of state. But none of that meant anything on a dirt road in the dark with mud on his face and a woman he had never met try and keep him alive. Zara had grown up in Lagos, the daughter of a nurse and a secondary school teacher who believed that hard work was not a strategy. It was a religion. She had carried that belief all the way to a pre-med program at university in the UK, and then quietly sat down 2 years before finishing, after something happened that she did not talk about. Not to friends, not to family, not to anyone. She had come to this small town in rural Virginia on what she told her mother was a short trip to clear her head. That was 22 months ago. She had planted a garden, learned to fix a leaking roof, and made peace with her own silence. She was not hiding. She was healing. There is a difference, though from the outside, it could be hard to tell. She could not move him far. She knew enough from her training to know that moving him wrong could make whatever was happening inside his skull a great deal worse. So she did what she could where he was. She ran back to the house for blankets, for her first aid kit, for the small battery-powered lantern she kept on the shelf above the kitchen door. She cushioned his head. She covered him. She checked his breathing every few minutes, counting, watching the rise and fall of his chest like it was the only thing in the world that mattered right now. Because it was. By the time she managed to get a weak signal on her phone, the call dropped twice before it connected. The dispatcher told her an ambulance could be 40 minutes out, maybe more. Roads were flooded on 2 routes in. She said she understood. She did not panic. She sat down beside him in the rain, pulled her jacket tighter, and waited. He did not regain consciousness that night. She managed, slowly and carefully, to get him onto a makeshift stretcher, a wooden board she dragged from her shed, a rope she had never thought she would use for something like this, and move him to the porch just as the rain began to ease. The paramedics arrived 53 minutes after a call. They worked quickly, checked him, stabilized him, spoke in low voices she could not fully hear. Then one of them turned to her and said he was stable, that she had done the right things, that if she had not been there, the outcome would likely have been very different. She nodded, watched them load him into the ambulance, watched the red lights disappear down the road. Then she went inside, sat at her kitchen table, and stared at her hands for a long time. She did not go back to sleep that night. The hospital was 40 minutes away. Kevin Bryan arrived unconscious, was assessed, stabilized, and admitted to a private room in the early hours of the morning. The attending physician documented a moderate traumatic brain injury, 2 fractured ribs, a deep laceration on the left side of his head, and significant bruising across his left shoulder and back. He was alive. He was stable. But when he opened his eyes for the first time the following afternoon, and a nurse asked him his name, he looked at her with the kind of stillness that is not calm. It is blank. He did not answer. Not because he was being difficult, because the answer was simply not there. The doctors called it post-traumatic amnesia. Not uncommon after a head injury of that severity. They said, it could be temporary. It could resolve in days, in weeks, or in longer. There were no guarantees with the brain. You watched. You waited. You hoped. What they did not know, what nobody knew yet, was that Kevin Bryan had no emergency contact on file at any hospital in the state. He had canceled that update 6 months ago during a restructuring of his personal affairs following a quiet and very private divorce. His phone had been destroyed in the accident. His wallet had been found in the wreckage. But the name on the cards meant nothing to the man in the bed because the man in the bed had no frame of reference for any name, including his own. His team did not raise an alert for 36 hours. Kevin traveled alone frequently. He kept his own schedule. He had a standing instruction with his executive assistant. If he did not check in within 36 hours of a solo trip, assume intentional silence and wait for contact. It was a boundary he had set and enforced. It was also, in this particular moment, the thing standing between him and anyone who could identify him. So for a day and a half, Kevin Bryan, $11 billion, 15 years of empire, 40 years of life, was simply a man with no name in a hospital bed, watching the ceiling like it might eventually tell him something useful. On the second day, a social worker came to see him. Soft voice, patient eyes, a notepad she barely wrote in. She asked him what he remembered. He told her the truth, which was almost nothing. Flashes, movement, rain, a light, a voice. He could not tell if the voice was real or something his mind had constructed to fill the silence. She told him that was okay, that his memory might come back gradually, or in pieces, or all at once, that he should not try to force it, that the brain had its own timeline and did not appreciate being rushed. He looked at her and said quietly, "Does anyone know I'm here?" She paused, then said they were working on it. He nodded, turned back to the ceiling, and somewhere in the back of his mind, buried under everything the injury had taken, something that might have been instinct told him that the answer to that question was no. Zara did not plan to go back. She told herself it was curiosity, not concern. She told herself she just wanted to know he had made it. She drove to the hospital on a Tuesday morning with a container of jollof rice she had made the night before. Not for him specifically, she told herself, just because she had made too much, and asked at the front desk about the man brought in from the accident on Route 9. The nurse looked at her for a moment, then said she could speak to the attending physician. Zara sat in a waiting room chair for 20 minutes before a tired-looking doctor in his 50s came to find her. He told her what she needed to know. Stable, awake, no identification confirmed yet, no memory of who he was. And then he said something that changed the direction of the next several weeks of Zara's life. He said the patient had asked twice about the person who had found him, that he seemed to find the idea of her a real person who had been there, who had made a decision to stay, more grounding than anything else they had been able to offer him so far. He asked if she would be willing to see him. She said she would think about it. She went in 15 minutes later. He was sitting up in the bed when she walked in, thinner looking than she remembered, though she had only seen him face down in the mud, so that was not saying much. The laceration on the left side of his head had been cleaned and closed. His eyes were dark brown and very still, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from a mind working hard behind a quiet face. He looked at her the way you look at someone you recognize from a dream, not quite certain, but not uncertain either. She said, "I'm the one who found you." He said, "I know. I don't know how I know that, but I know." She pulled up a chair, sat down, and for the next 40 minutes, she talked to a man who had no name about nothing in particular, about the garden, about the rain that night, about the sound the crash had made through the trees. She did not ask him questions about himself. She did not push. She simply talked, the way her mother used to talk to patients who were frightened, like the voice itself was the medicine. By the time she left, something had shifted in the room. She could feel it, and she did not entirely trust it. She came back the next day, and the day after that. This is a part of the story where most people would say things were simple. Two people, a strange situation, kindness exchanged in a quiet space, but nothing about what was growing between Zara and the man she had started calling Kevin. Not his name, just a name, something to call him that was not the patient, was simple. It was complicated in the way that real things are complicated. Not messy, not dramatic, just layered. Kevin was discharged after 11 days. The hospital had done what they could do. His physical injuries were healing. His memory had not returned in any meaningful way. Fragments came sometimes, quick and blurry, like trying to read a page through fog glass. A staircase, a city skyline, a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. Nothing he could hold on to. The social worker had filed the appropriate reports. There was no missing persons match in the system yet. His team's internal search had not yet been shared with law enforcement, a decision that would later be questioned by everyone involved. He had nowhere to go. Zara drove him back to her place without making a big thing of it. She told him it was temporary. He told her he understood. They both knew, without saying it, that the word temporary was doing a lot of work in that sentence. She gave him the spare room, clean sheets, a window that looked out over the garden, a small wooden desk that had been there when she moved in and that she had never found a use for until now. He sat at it the first evening and just looked outside for a long time. She watched him from the kitchen doorway and thought about how strange it was that a person could be completely unknown and somehow still feel familiar. He was not what she had expected. She had not known what to expect, but whatever picture she had quietly assembled in her mind, a man with no memory, adrift, lost, it did not match this. Kevin was observant. He noticed things. He noticed when a hinge on the back door was loose and fixed it without being asked. He noticed she drank her tea without sugar and made it exactly right every morning from the third day onward. He noticed when she went quiet, and he did not fill the silence with noise. He just let it be there, which was one of the things she had valued most about living alone and had not expected to find in another person. She began to tell him things, small things at first, that she was Nigerian, from Lagos, Surulere, a neighborhood that never slept, that her mother still called every Sunday, and that Zara let the phone ring 3 times before answering because her mother read too much into eagerness, that she could cook 12 dishes from memory and had once burned water, genuinely burned it, while distracted by a book she should have put down. He laughed at that. A real laugh, unguarded, the kind that arrived before a person could decide whether to let it out. She had not heard that laugh from anyone in a long time, and she stored it somewhere careful. He told her what he could, which was not much. He told her the fragments came at night mostly, right at the edge of sleep, when the mind stopped trying and started drifting. A voice he thought might be a woman's. Numbers, always numbers, like a language his hands understood even when his mind did not. A feeling, not a memory, just a feeling of carrying something heavy for a very long time. She asked him one evening if he was afraid. He thought about it for a moment, then said, "No, and I think that should worry me more than it does." She understood that more than she told him. Subscribe to Echotales by Ken if the story is already pulling at something in you, because where we're going next is where this story really begins. On the 14th day, it came back, not all at once, not like a switch. It came back the way dawn comes, slowly, then undeniably, then all at once in a way that made the darkness feel like it had never really been there at all. He was sitting at the wooden desk, early morning, cup of tea in his hand, watching the garden the way he had started to do every day, when a single image surfaced so clearly it was almost physical. A boardroom, his boardroom, 42nd floor, the New York skyline, filling the glass behind him, 12 people around the table, all of them waiting for him to speak. And he knew, not guessed, knew exactly what he'd been about to say. He set the cup down carefully. He sat with it for a long time. Let the rest come without forcing it. His name, his company, his life, the shape of it, the weight of it, the parts of it he was proud of and the parts he was not. His mother's voice, his ex-wife's face, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Devin, his best friend Devin, who would be looking for him right now, who had been looking for him for 2 weeks, and who was probably not sleeping. He thought about Zara in the kitchen below him, making breakfast, humming something under her breath. She always stopped humming when she heard him on the stairs. And he felt, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely torn between 2 versions of himself. He came downstairs. She looked up from the stove, and something in his face made her go still. She had learned his expressions over these 2 weeks the way you learn a landscape, slowly, then by heart. This expression was new. She said, "You remember?" It was not a question. He said, "Yes." She nodded, turned back to the stove, stirred something she did not need to stir, and then quietly she said, "How long have you known?" He said, "Since this morning." She accepted that. He watched her shoulders settle, not in relief, not in disappointment, in something more honest than either, acceptance. She had always known this moment was coming. She had simply hoped, without admitting it to herself, that it would come a little later. He sat down at the kitchen table. He did not reach for his tea. He looked at her and said, "I need to tell you who I am, and I need you to know that whoever that is, it doesn't change what these 2 weeks have been. Not for me." She turned to face him then. Her eyes were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was the voice of a woman who had learned a long time ago not to perform composure, who simply had it, deep in the bone, because life had required it of her. She said, "Then tell me." So he did. His full name was Kevin Bryan, founder and CEO of Hale Bryan Technologies, net worth $11 billion, offices in New York, London, and Singapore, a life lived almost entirely at altitude, private floors, private cars, private everything, insulated from the kind of moment that just happened to him by layers of money and structure so thick that a dirt road in rural Virginia had been able to crack through all of it only because he had been alone and careless and moving too fast, the way he always moved, the way, he told her quietly, he had been moving for 15 years without once stopping to ask himself why. Zara listened. She did not interrupt. She did not react the way people usually reacted to that name, to those numbers, the slight shift in posture, the recalibration behind the eyes, the almost invisible decision to become a slightly different version of themselves in response to what they had just learned. She just listened, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her tea, took a sip, and said, "So the numbers you kept dreaming about, that was the share price." He looked at her, then he laughed, and she smiled, small, private, the kind of smile that is not performed for anyone, that just arrives because something was genuinely funny. It was a last easy moment for a while. She helped him use her laptop to find a number for Devin. He stood in the garden to make the call, because the signal was better out there, and because she understood without being asked that it was a private conversation and left him to it. She could see him through the kitchen window. She watched Devin pick up on the first ring, watched Kevin's posture change, the way a person changes when they step back into a role they have held for a long time. Shoulders back, chin level, the body remembering what the mind had briefly forgotten. She watched it happen and felt something she did not have an immediate name for. Not loss exactly. Something quieter than that. The particular ache of watching someone return to a world you are not part of. Devin arrived the following morning. Black SUV, 2 security personnel, a personal physician who checked Kevin over in the spare room, while Zara made tea in the kitchen that nobody touched. Devin was tall, well-dressed, and visibly shaken beneath a surface that was working very hard to appear composed. He shook Zara's hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires, and said thank you in a voice that carried the weight of 2 weeks of not knowing. She said it was nothing. He looked at her in a way that said he knew it was not nothing, and that he would not forget it. Kevin came downstairs in clothes Devin had brought. Fitted, dark, expensive. The uniform of the life waiting to take him back. He looked like himself, not the man who had fixed the door hinge and made her tea and laughed in the kitchen. The other self, the one with the share price in his dreams. She looked at him and thought that both versions were real, and that was a complicated part. He stood in her doorway the way he had stood at that window on his first morning, taking something in, making a memory on purpose. He said her name once, just her name, the way you say a word you know you're going to need later. Then he said, "I meant what I said yesterday, about what these 2 weeks were." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm going to come back." She looked at him evenly, steadily, the way she looked at everything she was not sure she should trust, but wanted to. And she said, "Kevin, you're allowed to just say goodbye." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I don't want to say goodbye." She held his gaze. The morning light was coming in low through the trees. Somewhere in the garden a bird was doing something insistent and cheerful that neither of them acknowledged. And then she stepped forward just slightly and she said, "Then don't." Devin cleared his throat from the car. Kevin held her gaze one moment longer. Then he walked to the car, got in, and the black SUV moved slowly down the dirt road and disappeared through the trees the same way the ambulance had disappeared 3 weeks before. Zara stood at the door and watched it go. Then she went inside, washed the 2 mugs, set them on the rack side by side, and went out to garden. She knelt down in the soil she knew by heart, in the quiet she had chosen, in the life she had built to hold only herself. And she stayed there for a long time, her hands in the earth, the morning opening slowly around her. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if he would keep his word. Men like Kevin Bryant made promises the way the wind made shapes, real enough in the moment, gone before you could trace them. She knew that. She had grown up watching her mother hold the line against that particular kind of disappointment, steady as stone, because the alternative was to stop hoping altogether, and that was not something women in her family knew how to do. But she also knew this. She had looked into the eyes of that man for 2 weeks. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, the man, the one who noticed things and went quiet at the right moments and laughed like he had forgotten he was allowed to. And what she had seen in those eyes, both yesterday when he told her who he was, and this morning when he stood in the doorway and did not want to say goodbye, was not performance. It was not gratitude dressed up as something more. It was something that had no clean name, but that she recognized the way you recognize a place you have never been but somehow always known. She would wait, not forever. She was not built for waiting forever, but she would wait. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, her phone rang. Not her mother's number. A New York number she did not have saved. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up. Kevin Bryant walked back into his empire with a secret nobody in his world could see. He knew who he was now, but he also knew, for the first time in 15 years, who he wanted to be. And those two things were not yet the same person. The distance between them and the woman living quietly on a dirt road in Virginia is where part 2 begins. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Echotales by Ken right now. Every week we bring you stories like this one. Human, real, and worth your time. Hit subscribe, drop a comment below, and let me know what moved you most. I read every single one.